Good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, March 29th, 2021. My name is Sister April Vassell, and this is the inaugural broadcast of my YouTube channel called Speaking the Truth in Love. I do not bring this forth of my own undertaking. This is under the guidance and instruction of Father God and by the leading of His Holy Spirit. The Lord laid upon my heart in order to start a YouTube channel, and this is not something that I would undertake on my own. It's very unnerving. It's a huge responsibility, and I pray that I live up to the expectations that He's given me in order to move forward with this. I think today is a good day in order to start. In case, for those who don't already know, this is the first day of the trial for former police officer Derrick Chauvin, who has been accused and is on trial for the murder of George Floyd. Interestingly enough, I got up very early this morning, went downstairs, went to take care of one of 5 pets that I have around here, and had the TV on. They were starting to go over the preliminaries for the upcoming trial. It's about 8 in the morning, a little bit earlier than that. And the Lord pressed something on my spirit. Strange. Something that I would not have expected from Him. He dropped 5 words into my spirit. It was based on a very familiar story from the Bible about King David and Uriah the Hittite, and his conversation with Nathan the prophet. Didn't really expect for what he said to me. The 5 words that he gave me were the value of a life. I was kind of shocked by it. Everybody knows the story about David being in a place he wasn't supposed to be, in the palace instead of out battling with the rest of the army like he was supposed to be. He looks on a roof, sees a gorgeous woman, wants her, is told she's married, doesn't faze him anyway, takes her, has his way with her, impregnates her, then calls back her husband, Uriah the Hittite, in order to try and coax, cajole, trick him into going home, having some R&R with his wife, so that he can cover his tracks, that he would never be the wiser, that the child was not his own. Didn't work. When he tried 3 different attempts to get Uriah to go home and he wouldn't, he sends him back with an envelope with a message in it for his supervisor, commander of the army, a man named Joab. In the note, Joab reads, "Put Uriah in the hottest part of the battle and then withdraw so he has no protection." So he did just that, and Uriah got killed. Pretty cold, isn't it? After David found out that Uriah the Hittite was dead, he goes and he marries his widow and makes her his wife. And God saw the whole thing, and He was greatly displeased. Now, you're wondering, what has any of this got to do with Derrick Chauvin? Stick around. The way the Lord explained it to me, it really blew my mind. My text will be 2 Samuel chapter 11, and we'll be starting at verse 14. I'll be reading from the New Living Translation, Anglican version. Verse 14. So the next morning David wrote a letter to Joab and gave it to Uriah to deliver. The letter instructed Joab, "Station Uriah on the front lines where the battle is fiercest, then pull back so that he will be killed." Verse 16. So Joab assigned Uriah to the spot close to the city wall where he knew the enemy's strongest men were fighting. And when the enemy soldiers came out of the city to fight, Uriah the Hittite was killed along with several of the Israelite soldiers. Then Joab sent a battle report to David. Verse 19. He told his messenger, "Report all the news of the battle to the king." But he might get angry and ask, "Why did the troops go so close to the city? Didn't they know that there would be shooting from the walls?" Verse 21. Wasn't Abimelech, son of Gideon, killed at Thebez by a woman who threw a millstone down on top of him from the wall? Why would you get so close to the wall? Then tell him, quote, Uriah the Hittite was killed too, end quote. Verse 22. So the messenger went to Jerusalem and gave a complete report to David. "The enemy came out against us in the open fields," he said, "and as we chased them back to the city gate, the archers on the wall shot arrows at us. Some of the king's men were killed, including Uriah the Hittite." Verse 25. "Well," this is King David's response, "tell Joab not to be discouraged," David said. "The sword devours this one today and that one tomorrow. Fight harder next time and conquer the city." End quote. We'll stop right there. This is somebody who served David loyally in his army. He fought valiantly for him. He laid his life down for his king many times over. He thought more of his king than his king thought of him. And the king's attitude towards him was, so he's got killed, no big deal. Ho-hum, let's move on. Pretty cold, shrewd, heartless way to speak about somebody who laid down their life for their king who had betrayed him. King David was guilty of not valuing a life. I'll continue. Chapter 12, verse 1. So the Lord sent Nathan the prophet to tell David this story. There were two men in a certain town. One was rich, one was poor. The rich man owned a great many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing but one little lamb that he had bought. He raised that little lamb, and it grew up with his children. It ate from the man's own plate, drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. One day a guest arrived at the home of the rich man, but instead of killing an animal from his own flock or herd, he took the poor man's lamb and killed it and prepared it for his guest. David was furious. "As surely as the Lord lives," he vowed, "any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one he stole, and for having no pity." Verse 7. Then Nathan said to David, "You are that man. The Lord, the God of Israel, says, I anointed you king of Israel and saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you your master's house, his wives, and the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. Why then have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed? For you have murdered Uriah the Hittite with the sword of the Ammonites and stolen his wife. From this time on, your family will live by the sword because you have despised me by taking Uriah's wife to be your own." We'll stop right there. David didn't seem to have a problem with the story that Nathan the prophet told him. Somebody ripped off something valuable from his neighbor, didn't need to do it, it was something precious, it was cold-hearted, ruthless. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? When I get my fingers and my hands on him, I'll tear him to pieces. Kill him! When he thought it was somebody else. Till the Lord checked him and said, wait a minute, dude. You're the man. You're the one that was cold-hearted. You're the one that's the thief. You're the one that was heartless. You're the one that abused the power and authority that I gave you. You were nothing when I met you. Nothing more than a knee-high kid, scrapper. Didn't have much of anything. You were left out on your own with sheep. And from the sheep herder, I turned you into a king. I gave you power. I gave you authority. I gave you land. I gave you wealth. I gave you women. I gave you everything you could possibly want. And what did you do? You abused the power and authority that I gave you. Let's pause right there. What has that got to do with the trial that's going on, the climate of the country, and the tense attitudes that are going on throughout people's minds and hearts right now? It's this. Derrick Chauvin was a hired servant, just like King David was a hired servant. Their positions may have been different. The amount of prestige and responsibility may have been different. But the point was, each was assigned a certain level of authority and responsibility, which was supposed to be carried out with honor, dignity, responsibility, and grace, care, mercy, and diligence for whoever they came in contact with, be they great or small. Each was guilty of abusing the authority and power that was given to them. Each thought that they were above the law, that the rules didn't apply to them, that they could do whatever they pleased because of the uniform that they were wearing, whether it was the robe of a king or the uniform of a police officer. Made no difference. Each had been given a level of responsibility to carry forth their jobs with the honor and respect and trust that God gave them once it was assigned to them, and they both failed miserably. Derrick Chauvin showed no heart, no warmth, no mercy to George Floyd. He took his knee, something that God gave each and every one of us, to run, to jump, to dance, to bend down and express our loyalty, to tie our shoes, to pledge our love, and to ask for hands in marriage. He gave us the gift of the knee to give us flexibility so we wouldn't be walking like stiff robots. Something that was he made for us to make our lives easier. And he took it. He took the gift God gave him and used it as a guillotine on a human neck. He used something that God gave him and played God himself as judge, jury, and executioner, like he had nobody to answer to, like God didn't hear George Floyd's cries for mercy, for air, for one more chance at life, his pleas fell upon deaf ears. George Floyd's life had no value whatsoever to Derrick Chauvin. A dispute supposedly over $20 that may or may not have been owed was the price, or how much George Floyd's life was valued. Little to nothing. He didn't invest in it. He didn't nurture it. He had no vested interest than a piece of paper in George Floyd. And for a piece of paper that could be torn up, burned up, or fly away on a breeze in the wind, that was the value of a human life. Pretty frightening, isn't it? Which leads me to ask, are we equally as cavalier and unfeeling about a human life? There's a climate in this country where if it means nothing to me, it has no value at all. And God is tired of it. He took time to create mankind. He spoke everything else into existence, but for us, he took his hands and he fashioned us. He took his time. Everything that you see, every detail on the human body, he took his time to put there. From hair on your head to the eyelashes that cover your eyes. The lips that he put on people's faces. The limbs that he gave them and the fingers so they could pick things up. Embrace people. The human voice that he gave us in order to sing back to him, to thank him, to appreciate others, to encourage others. He invested in us. He had a personal stake in George Floyd just as much as anybody else. But Derrick Chauvin put himself in God's place and said, your life has no value, so you got to go. Very arrogant indeed. God looks at life as being valuable so much that when we're created in a womb, that for him is his own personal vault. That's his safe. You would never think that a womb would be looked at in such a particular way, but he does. He looks at the human womb of the woman that carries the child to term as his own personal vault. He put his treasures in a safe, behind closed doors, if you will, to protect it from greedy, thieving eyes or nosy bodies, only to be brought forth when he says it was ready. That's how he felt about George Floyd. He put him in a vault. He nurtured and protected him through the mother that he gave him when she brought him forth into the world. He was a valued treasure. He wasn't sinless. We're not talking about that. Nobody is. But he had value. And when you discard, denigrate, demean, devalue, and destroy something that God made with his own personal hands, then you got a problem on your hands. That's not something he's going to ignore. He will address it quickly. So his eyes are watching all of us right now. And he's doing an inventory check. An inventory check of hearts, minds, and attitudes. And what is needed in this country right now, from Christians and non-Christians alike, is an attitude adjustment. There's too much arrogance, ungratefulness, rudeness, self-centeredness, and abusiveness. Too many cries for mercy that have gone unheard and unanswered, that have come up into his ears. And now he's going to roll up his sleeves and clean house. Nobody gets it right all the time. If we all were to pay for the sins that we committed from the time we drew our first breath to the day that's on this calendar, there'd be no people on the earth. There'd be nothing but a bunch of fat, happy animals all over the place. It's time that we treat each other the way that we want to be treated. And God is going to hold each and every one of us responsible for how we treat each other. If he made a human being, whether we like them or not, he made that human being. He invested a piece of himself into each and every person on the face of this earth. Only he gets the right to determine who lives and who dies. This is April Bassell, and we're speaking the truth in love. God bless you.